This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Aaron asks Joey about the coming out Gauntlet, and Joey asks Aaron about the role of nuance in our world today.
Woo!
Hey, Aaron, I just want you to know that I'd be left in the dust, but you're stuck by you're my sunflower.
I think that's how we start the show. That's what a Joey sounds like.
Oh, this is what a Joey... I got all the lyrics wrong, so it is what a Joey sounds like.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I would have to say, bop. That's what an Aaron sounds like. That's where we are today. That's all I got. Sunflowers, it was on the cover of the album, the Hanson. Go ahead.
Yeah.
It's okay.
The self-titled album. This is what an executive producer and White Iverson, Jess Vander, sounds like.
What?
Even I don't get the sports reference. Like, I am like, huh?
It's actually a Post Malone reference because Jess loves Post Malone.
Oh.
I see.
Hi, this is Jess.
I love this. This is starting off nice and loosey-goosey.
Yeah, we're here.
We're here, and I see walls. I see a roof. I think I even see a mop. Housekeeping. Sorry, I was thinking house cleaning. I got messed up. Do we have any housekeeping/cleaning to do?
This is nonsense.com and criticalnonsense@sylvain.co. If you have any corrections department or subjects you want us to cover, send us an email, send us a correction. We like them. Jess, you have other housekeeping?
Yeah, we've been posting a lot about hiring people. And if you are a type of person who listens to the show and you're like, wow, I wish I could hang out with you guys, you could, in fact, do that if you worked with us, because we get to do this all the time.
Indeed. It's true.
So I don't know if that's a thing.
Shoot us a note. Yeah.
But you know.
Critical nonsense at sylvain.co. Hit us up. Strategists, lead strategists.
Unless you're sending us corrections departments, in which case
shut it down.
Put it in the round file.
We're sending mixed signals here.
It's really confusing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's it. That's the housekeeping. Do we have any corrections department? Jess and I nailed it last week. There can't be anything wrong.
Nothing about that.
Jess is running a fever from her second shot of the vaccine. I'm never wrong. So I think
I did receive several personal notes about other people experiencing their form of butter anxiety, which I am proud, or maybe not proud. I'm just like, there's something really, I don't feel so alone anymore. So, and I've also become more conscious of my butter consumption, not necessarily in the way you may think, which is like, should be having less, but more like almost like a challenge. Can I prove that it's not ridiculous to have many pounds of butter in one's freezer?
Related and completely unrelated, I sent a friend a video from our creative website that Charles Hodges made in 2008 called Paula Deen's Butter Sleep. You can search it on YouTube. It's a delight. It's terrible and
I'm scared.
Wonderful. It involves rubbing butter all over your arms, covering it in cinnamon sugar, and doing 27 Hail Marys and tucking yourself into bed under the covers like a warm butter oven.
This seems logical. This seems right for 2008.
Yeah. Paula Deen's Butter Sleep. YouTube, search it.
Terrifying. So I will take us from 2008 to 2000 late right now. It didn't work. But
Fergie.
I got something to talk about.
Fergalicious Def.
Def. We have a thing to talk about that is highly topical, which is so unusual for us, right? This is the culture and the culture science and tech.
Sorry, I only deal with highbrow concepts about social sciences. Thanks. Bye.
Indeed. I snoot every day toward those social science topics. So I don't know if you guys follow People Magazine or Good Morning America the way that I do, but in the past, I'm glad because I've got a yarn to spin for you. So in the past 48 hours, one of the contestants on The Bachelor from season 23, I believe, announced to the world, specifically to Robin Roberts on Good Morning America yesterday morning.
Shout out Robin Roberts.
In fact, 100% hero, amazing journalist, trailblazer, like true props. Yeah, so he came out on Good Morning America and he announced to the world that this 6'4" ex-football player with perfect teeth and an amazing jawline is gay. And the pink internet, the triangular Twitter sphere has been quite a buzz, if you will. Fuchsia web is good. Fuchsia web is really good. It's been a buzz because there's a lot going on in here. There is empathy for another human being that's realizing, or not realizing, but coming forth with their truth. There is the sort of almost surprise from the coastal elite that, oh yeah, coming out is still a thing. There's also questions from younger generations about, should coming out even exist? What does it mean to, quote, come out? Shouldn't your identity be something that you project to the world organically and in small drips that other people just move into rather than a PR blitz? Not to mention the people that are not so happy that it looks like he's going to get a Netflix deal out of this. And we're going to talk about especially some of the allegations that came to light about harassment and restraining orders that have just been sort of conveniently swept under the rug. So I've set the stage, but essentially all of this boils down to one central question. What are the dangers of coming out becoming outdated?
So first things first, something you said that I realized while you were talking is, one, your drag name should be Yarn to Spin, because you said
that's really good. I'm gonna let go of Belize Navidad and I'll go ahead and make Yarn to Spin the one. Always be prepared with your drag name, ladies and gentlemen. Always be prepared.
Oh my gosh.
I think this is a fascinating question. Like, genuinely, especially because I'm not queer, and so all of my interactions with this are obviously like through friends and loved ones and family who have come out. But the idea of, are there waves of queer theory or gay rights activism in the way that were sort of like waves of feminism that have been like clearly identified? Because it makes me think about the thing that we've talked about a lot of, like the second wave of movements being sort of exploitative in the past. I mean, this has come up on a number of episodes, but that was the first idea that my head went to around the story, right? Like, I don't watch The Bachelor, I don't know this person, but there's an interesting aspect of passing that as like a football player, like a large sort of like mask presenting cisgendered man, that he was able to sort of go through a football career and get all of the benefits of passing. And then once those benefits were gone, then he moved on to something else and is now sort of, like standing on the back of giants and making money in ways that those people didn't. And right, like, to my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure that this is the case, like we can look it up live after this, but I don't think there's ever been an out NFL player, like a publicly out. There are obviously, like, naturally you assume that there have been gay NFL players, but I don't think there's ever been one who is like publicly out while they're playing. And there's like tons of terrible things in that culture. But that idea of sort of, now that I've moved on or made my money or got my things from, passing and pretending that I'm straight potentially, not to say that wouldn't have been like a difficult challenge for this person, but at the same time, like, now everyone made it safe for him to feel like he can come out and he's going to, like, be able to like win from that. It is weird. It makes me feel icky.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot in there. I think, you know, specifically to the NFL point, Michael Sam in 2014 was supposed to be, he was the first gay player that was drafted to the NFL.
Yes,
and
you're right.
But he was waived. Like he didn't
play.
He didn't play. And all the same conversations that came up about gays in the military, about unit cohesion and all that sort of thing were the exact same ones that have been used in every professional sports league to try to keep players from coming out. But I think that this idea of privilege,
Jason Collins in the NBA too, yeah.
Absolutely. Billy Beam in the MLB. Those are the letters for baseball.
Yeah.
Whew, yep. There it is. But what's interesting is that the concept of winning that's at the heart of this is nodding directly to the conversation about privilege that's been going on and bubbling up so much over the past few years in terms of race. And so there have been a lot of people who've pointed out just in the past 2 weeks the discussion and in some cases controversy around Lil Nas X's Montero video. And, you know, Lil Nas X has to forge his own path. He's, you know, literally built his career from being an Instagram staple that turns into being, you know, borrowed or partnered with Billy Ray Cyrus. And, you know, everything sort of goes from there. But then you've got this really beautiful dude who just, for all intents and purposes, is like the visual apex of privilege, and he seems to be getting a pass through the coming out gauntlet. And I think that it does strike a little bit in the
Colton,
heart
you mean?
of,
that's who you're talking about, not
Colton. Thank you. Clarification. And so when you see that happening, I think that the internet has responded by calling out this sense of like, why do certain people even get to leapfrog the gauntlet to get, you know, public accolades and even financial wealth? But I think that there is also a deeply seated and equally as prevalent conversation around the fact that this is a person who is coming out, and that process, that idea of finding and knowing who you are, and then finding the words to say that to other people no matter what, and on top of that, saying that to the entire world. That work is stuff that a lot of people, especially straight people in particular, just choose not to do. You know, they choose to fall victim is probably heavy-handed, but they don't necessarily have, in my perspective, you know, sample size of one projecting out, the same sort of support necessarily to say, this is who you are. And it's not to draw a line between it being a straight gay binary is very 90s gay of me, and I'll call that out. It really does have to do with otherness and more time celebrating otherness in cultures that do.
Okay, I have a hypothesis that ties these things together. I wonder if part of this is because of the kind of parallel dimension that Colton Underwood lives in, right? Like, Joey, you talked about the second wave of movements that maybe like the culture is at. Like maybe we are like this part of the culture is like far ahead. But lest we not forget that Colton Underwood's season was entirely dominated by like everyone obsessing over his virginity, right? And like that is that anyone would care about that in the culture, at least like as we may know it, seems totally antiquated until you remember that like there is a whole like literal Bachelor Nation is like has its own cultural strata, right? And so what's really interesting is, in my mind, almost like the idea of Colton not experiencing the coming out gauntlet is like a straddling of the parallel dimensions, or like, I don't know, maybe I'm mixing metaphors too much, but it's the idea in almost that like he's from this space, but there's a very accepting, more progressive other part of the culture that's like past that. And so you look at that and you're like, why is that even like, how do I make sense of that? And it's because it's like you're looking at an anachronism somehow.
Yes, that is it. I like the number of times that I've been talking about in the past 24 hours how this entire arc of coming out, which is public announcement that, you know, gets talked about in many places, which leads to sort of a media output, be it a documentary or a film, or in this case, a Netflix series, that then turns into lucrative speaking engagements that sustain you for another 10 years. Like, that's every one of the, with the exception, I believe, of Michael Sam, every one of the major sports league players that we just mentioned did that. Ellen, we'll come back to Ellen in a minute, and we'll come back to Lance Bass in a minute. But the people in the PR teams that architected those coming out structures, those that worked on Chaz Bono's coming out story and Caitlyn Jenner's coming out story, literally structure this in such a way to create a profitable next step for these public figures to navigate coming out. And at the same time, I think that's because we've had that happen since 1993, I think it was, that Ellen came out, 92. It feels so much like we're just looking back 20 years.
Yeah.
It's like we're really doing this the same way.
Right.
And I think that it also highlights the fact that we do live in two very different countries.
Yeah.
Many different countries, not just two. And the viewership of Good Morning America, The Bachelor, etc., is not necessarily the exact same ones who were loving the Call Me By Your Name video.
Yeah. Real quick, corrections department live. It was 1997, just so we could put that in.
Wow. Well, live corrected in seventh grade.
No, but what you're saying is interesting, and I think this idea of coming out. Let me play something off of you, and you tell me if it sounds true or not. Because
dunk on me, bro.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind, like as a recent, relatively famous comparison, is when Elliot Page came out as trans. And if you look at the way in which that was played out, I think, without having seen the Colton Underwood interview, Elliot Page was like very, very clear and explicit about all of the work that people had done before he was able to come out as trans, and all of the people who put their lives and safety on the line for them to then be able to come out, you know, on that day as a trans person, and the work that they wanted to do. And the reason I bring this up is because the way in which his coming out as trans was positioned was one to be part of a new community. In some way, they were coming out so that they could say, like, trans community, I'm one of you, I'm here. They're also doing work to the non-trans community at the time to say, like, this is now how I want people to perceive me and how I want to be acknowledged in the world and all of that. But there's something interesting about the story that you're saying about Colton Underwood and this idea of sort of different cultures, right? Like, Colton Underwood is from Indiana, which has like a much more conservative, Christian, like sort of main, like majority culture. And what him coming out seems to be not towards the gay community as saying like, I am now sort of a member of the gay community. It sounds like the orientation is to say, hey, community that I already existed in which you don't accept gayness as sort of an acceptable position on life, or whatever, being a non-sinner, whatever it is. I don't know his religiosity or not, but that idea, he's coming out to the culture that he was already a part of and asking for their acceptance, as opposed to trying to come out and become a part of the gay or queer community. That's what it sounds like. And so the question of like, who is the audience for your coming out is sort of an interesting question.
Yeah. And the idea that, whether you're saying don't hate me versus love me for who I am, and how long it takes to learn and choose to articulate both of those questions. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that Chaz Bono talked a lot about when he came out, which was you come out publicly and you're new to all of this. Like, you may, in many, many cases, unless you're Aaron Schock, but we'll putting a pin on that one. Whew, Ooh. A lot of times you're coming out and you don't have a community yet. And a lot of this coming out exercise in public as a public figure, all of a sudden you're going to get a deluge of attention in a lot of different ways. And all of a sudden you feel as though you're a member of a community that you don't even understand. And there's a lot of things, there are a lot of like stereotypes and tropes and things like that that are lingua franca, amongst gay people that like in many cases are used to find each other and have historically been used to create safe spaces where we literally weren't safe. And all of a sudden recognizing that or feeling this pressure that there's a new language that you need to learn, it is very appropriate to simply say, don't reject me, people that I know. I don't know these people and I don't know that they're my community. So why would I reject you and run away from something and I don't know where I'm going?
Yeah.
The other point too that's really important, I think it's an interesting and important texture to this, which is that one of the things that I think has made coming out as an event, like or pride festivals and pride parades, as a thing that many have rallied around, is because the central conceit is an idea of love me for who I am. I am who I am and I'm proud of that. Come hell or high water, that's who I am. And that's a very universal idea. That's also a universal process that one can get to truly love themselves in face of other people's hatred, like visceral, actual hatred. And that same idea of loving me for who I am, or saying to the world I should be proud of who I am, is something that translates very differently for different identities. So it's very different for gay men than it is for gay women, to say nothing of all of the shades of sexuality in between, queer. And then we get to gender identity. That's different. Gender expression, totally different. There are questions of whether or not coming out necessarily is even a part of one's journey. Are you intending for the world to see you as something else, and how does your story affect or is relevant to others? And I bring up just those that are in the gender and sexuality spectrum to point out all the other ways in which people have things other closets that they want to come out of, but society and others say you can't. And I think that ultimately, if Colton Underwood is coming out, we should applaud him. It's just, we should also acknowledge, as Billy Eichner pointed out, that there are a lot of people who came out before him that allowed this to happen, and they can, should, and need to be a part of this narrative just as much as his Netflix deal with Gus Kenworthy, who's incredibly hot and lives around the corner, I think. So,
and also to speak nothing of what you had mentioned earlier, Aaron, but also, regardless of this particular thing, like, is this a person that anyone should be spending their time paying attention to?
Yeah. I mean, the sexual harassment allegations that are against him, and I say allegations just because I don't know all the details.
Sprinkle the allegations.
Yes, it's an important
allegedly.
Allegedly. But it's the question of, is everyone who comes out and is full of pride worth idolizing, worth following? And also, shouldn't we be looking at the flaws and foibles of public figures, period? Does that change that at all? And that's where it comes back a little bit to Ellen. I mean, the conversation about Ellen as a trailblazer in media to the queer community cannot be ignored, but also the conversations and allegations that have been coming up around the Ellen show, what she might or might not have known about the work environment that she created for the show that has been horrible by any and all accounts. Those two things we have to hold in both hands. We can't just hold one and not recognize the other.
There is to tie back to the question that you brought up at the beginning of when does coming out become out of date? How did you phrase it?
Outdated.
I said become outdated, but I like out of date. It throws another of in there. Good copywriting.
I think there's a question of cultural relativity in this, both about like where is your position in the cultures that you exist, as well as how does it relate to the thing that you're coming out about. And I don't know Colton. I don't know I know nothing of this person until today when we've talked about this. But this idea of how difficult is it given your cultural relationship to, right? So not to say that Colton coming out is anywhere approaching what, Ellen coming out or others before him have come out, but it may be a lot harder than people who have recently come out of younger generations in geographies that are more culturally accepting. And so there is that idea of like, this may be really challenging and may also do some work for people in cultures that are closer to Colton's culture of growing up in Indiana or, other places that are more, socially conservative to be able to come out. And so maybe he's adding his brick, but just acknowledging that your brick sits on someone else's. And the question of when does coming out ever become outdated is probably like a question of where is like the broader state of majoritarian culture, which maybe brings us. Oh, go ahead.
I got one more before because I feel the corner. We're nudging into it, but I think you just pointed out two things that are really important. One is that we talked about the gauntlet at the beginning of this. There is the public gauntlet for those that are in the public eye, which is. And that's the one that I think a lot of people identify with their professional lives or their workplaces, and that's sort of the connection. But there's also the personal gauntlet, and it has to do with these public figures who literally come from places. They're not just abstract characters. They are real people with real family around them and friends around them who are going to have to deal with the repercussions of their public statement. And so the gauntlet, especially the public gauntlet, is one that I think a lot of folks are responding to. But I think the private gauntlet is the one that I have a lot of empathy for. And that's the one that's closer in and that is, it doesn't change whether you're a public figure or not. Realizing who you are and learning the consequences of saying that with a full voice and living through those consequences is real work. And the terrifying reality that no one ever stops coming out. I think that's always the fallacy about these coming out moments is that people think like, even that question, when did you come out? It's like, I'm doing it right now. I got to do it in every meeting I walk into. I've got to choose whether or not I want to let people know something about me and how I want to frame it and all of that.
You're doing it on this episode.
That doesn't stop. The process doesn't stop. You learn what it means to you, how it fits with your life and how important it is. And that's work that we can all learn to do.
Can we just also call out Bachelor Nation currently because, the idea of Colton coming out, and I don't know what the response is, but if Colton is sort of met with open arms from Bachelor Nation and Rachel Lindsay was like, drew wild ire for being a black woman who was upset about like very public moments of racism and like got death threats and had to go off Instagram and all of these other things simply for being a black woman in Bachelor Nation. Like Bachelor Nation, get your shit together. Like,
yes, they need a few get your shit together days. They need some gist days.
Yeah, they need some gist days.
So, yes. Does this, are we rolling on up into wrap up corner? Is that what this is now? Jess, how
Jess, did you just eat a lemon?
This one's tricky because I think, answering the original question, coming out is both outdated and the most prevalent thing at the same time. And there are, as Aaron just talked about, public and private dangers for that individual. There are dangers crossing over the parallel dimensions and trying to interpret, what someone's experience is. But there are also the dangers of that person not recognizing their privilege, or if they have it, specifically in the scenario that you brought to us today, Aaron, about Colton, and not about having to go through the fullest extent of the coming out gauntlet, so to speak, but also that it may be erasing so much more about him and other conversations, and that is kind of the trouble with it all, is how something like this is not necessarily telling the whole story. And I'm glad you brought it to us today, how uncomfortable it may make us feel to discuss, just to try to talk about that unsaid piece.
I love that. Let's all polite silence is impolite. That's sort of a thing that we've all learned. So let's get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I hope that everybody feels just a little bit about this, and we'll feel more going forward.
Aaron, Jess.
Hey.
So the whole time that we were having that last conversation, I was thinking about the thing that I wanted to talk to you, because there's so much in a recent interview that I heard with Tressie McMillan Cottom that I had this moment of deep intellectual crush, because I had been thinking about this idea of nuance and sort of deep conversations within the context of how we talk about things online, and how concise and sharp things need to be, and what can you fit in 240 characters. And I heard this interview with Tressie, and she was talking about all the things that I had been thinking about in sharper and more nuanced ways than I had been thinking about them. And so what I wanted to come to y'all with, as a podcast that I think has a lot of thick conversations, as Tressie would say, where we're giving room for nuance and discussion, and not necessarily coming to answers, and sort of trying to look at things from multiple directions. What is the role of nuance in an increasingly media soundbite oriented culture?
So let me get this straight.
As usual.
You just weren't listening to anything from the last conversation?
No, I didn't hear anything.
You were just daydreaming about your new philosopher crush?
Yeah.
Okay.
What cool. I'm coming out as someone with ADHD right now.
Yes. It never the coming out exercise never stops.
Don't redirect from the conversation. All right, Aaron, you were about to say something meaningful.
No, I think it kills me. This is not a roundabout answer. I hate texting. Or not specifically texting. I hate short form communication, because I think it's impossible for me to express myself in a time efficient manner. I mean, anyone who listens to this podcast knows that I love language, and sometimes I'll roll through 5 different versions of the same word until I get, or different variations on the same idea, until I get to the articulation that's congruent with how I feel. And I can't do that over text, because it really, really throws people off. And I thrive on this sort of specificity, but it's less so about being specific, because I think that, the thing needs to be defined a certain way. But I do think that what nuance allows is congruence between what we're feeling or thinking inside, whether it's a specific idea or a concept, and how others receive that. And it's so much an attempt in obliterating that sort of unfillable gap between two people in any sort of communication or conversation, where that nuance is it's like a miracle berry with a lemon. It blows your mind, because it actually allows you to fully get inside someone's head in a way that you can't. And so maintaining that sense of that reaching for nuance and specificity as a communicator on the way out, but also creating a collective sensitivity and appreciation for that type of specificity on the way in makes for such meaningful and powerful actual communication. And it makes us all move together emotionally better. When we're actually talking to partners, it helps us produce better work when we're collaborating with colleagues or clients or other sorts of partners. So maybe nuance is a way for us to simply, or is the secret weapon to closing the gap between all of the micro bubbles that we're in. But I also don't think we're ever going to get there, because I am an increasingly perpetual pessimist, which is terrible. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting, right? So like, we just had a thick conversation, I think, as Tressie would describe it, about this idea of like coming out and its relationship to Colton and all of these other things, right? Like, we were exploring it pretty wide and trying to look at things from both sides. And I think we're like in this moment, right? Which, she, I think, is arguing in some of her writings and the things that the essays, and I'm interested in reading the book. I haven't read it. I think the conversation came out earlier this week, which was sort of my first introduction to her. But that idea of like, we're in a time where we need to be having like a lot of thick conversations about the environment, about, social justice, about sort of political polarity, about, generational dynamics, about COVID. Like, all of these things are areas that require a depth and a nuance and like a thickness of conversation. And at the same time, we're sort of moving into these platforms that don't necessarily allow for thick conversations. And so that balance, right? Like, I think people are trying to have, like, and what she was suggesting is like, people are trying to have thick conversations on like Twitter or Instagram. And also, like, is that even possible? Like, can you do that thing? Can you have a nuanced discussion about like racial justice on Instagram? You can make someone aware of an issue, but you're not going to like explore both sides of a topic or whatever.
See, this is one example where at first I was going to rebut by saying, well, actually, there are just a lot of technologies that make this a lot easier, like that you can see me right now while we're talking, and had a cue to know that maybe I had a thought is itself a type of communicative nuance that technology allows for. But is it better than is it even holding a candle to what it would be if we were having the same conversation in person? No. And that reduction of definition is point one, right? Like, technology may be able to provide multiple inputs add more nuance, but it still concertedly has to cut out some things, or unless someone decided to keep it in. That's part one. Another part is the things that we might be able to do online, for instance, or by means of new media that are new, that I wonder if we just haven't explored how to connect them in as nuanced a fashion yet. For instance, the idea that there is an emoji that it can express a feeling that now I cannot say aloud without like, how there was a whole thing where people would say the certain shorthand out loud because it was the closest approximation to what they meant, like BRB or LOL, which is so silly text speak. But now there are certain emojis like this one where the person's like holding up the hand on the side that, like, yes, I could do that in person, but that looks very silly. And it means something totally different than what might be communicated by sending that emoji online. I guess part two is a lot less clear than part one, but it has something to do with the idea of sort of the early stage kind of sprouts of nuance online that we maybe just haven't sown yet.
I love that in particular because it seems to me to be so much about learning a universal language. Like, truly, I am proud of who I am. I'm coming out as a person who is not into texting or emojis. People who send me emoji, I'm like, I hope I understand what they're intending to say. Like, I'm interpreting it away, and I don't know if they mean to. And there is a question of like, at what point do we go from like base communication to nuance? And is there a potential that, given we're learning how to speak through these languages that were just in that early stage of just creating a universal baseline. I'm pretending that I'm like a part of that universal baseline, but I'm just stubborn. That's really what it is.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, at least to the number 2 point, my response is that sounds sort of like the flexibility of language, or like the ability of language to do more potentially. But the question of whether we're having the thick conversations, so like even if language itself is becoming capable of more, whether or not we're having conversations that are taking full advantage of that added capacity potentially for language to communicate nuance and depth of like emotions, right? Like emojis, like I don't know what like the breakout of emoji is, but part of it is emotion. I don't know what the OG part is. I'm assuming because it's from Unicode, it might be something Japanese as like the back end of it.
No, isn't it emotive?
G.
Image, emotive, like image. But instead of the G, it's a J. No, I'm gonna sound stupid. Please cut all of this, Alex. I hate it. I don't want it.
And please email us at criticalnonsense@sylvain.co just to let us know what emoji is. Anyway, Continue, Joseph.
But I think like some platforms that are also growing are places where we can potentially have thicker conversations, right? Like a podcast is, not that it's new, radio existed before, but it is a place where you can have at least has the potential for conversations with expanded depth, because purely based on like the time it takes to consume this podcast, even if you're listening to it at double speed, is far more information is packed into that and perspectives than a 240 character tweet. But Twitter is like far more communication is happening in that format than in, people having conversations on podcasts.
Can I just corrections my department, my own ignorant self? Emoji comes from meaning picture in Japanese, and moji, which means character, picture character, which sounds way more relevant than whatever nonsense I was spewing.
I'm there. It's all good. No, I think, and I think the reason that I find this a little bit interesting is because some forms of communication eliminate the need or collapse the time it takes to have a conversation. So I think about like German words that like collapse 8
Buckpfeifengesicht.
And what does that mean?
A face that looks like it needs punching.
How good is that? How good is that? There's like the media version of this too. I can't truly describe what it feels like to be replaying Batman Arkham Knight and like hitting a really, really difficult part of the game. And then I finally break through and I happen to hit like a cinematic in which I'm on the top of a tower in Miyagazi Plaza in Gotham City. Like there is a feeling there. And I think that the idea that stage 1 is about collapsing the sort of observation or the feeling with the communication of it is step 1. But then to your point about like what devices are we taking advantage of the spaces that require us to hopefully have some of these very complicated conversations more efficiently? We're definitely not. And I think that there's also a question of who wants to engage in those conversations. So there's a question of intent and as well as capability.
Yeah, want to, can also just makes me feel like it's not revelatory, but just the idea that there's so many people out there who are probably really frustrated about this. Like like frustrated and not being able to identify what the problem is, but like, I have a thing that I either want to say, like a conversation I want to have, or even a thing I want to say about myself that like I can't, so I gotta like try another post because like that wasn't good enough. I'm gonna delete all my other Instagrams because like no, that wasn't like true enough to the complexity of my multi-dimensional self. Like
yeah,
I just want to get at just the right thing, and I can imagine there's this consuming frustration that people can't put their finger on of just like, that's not quite right.
Joey experiences this with me at least once a week, where I say something and then I have to write like 18 pages of, this is what I actually meant. I didn't mean it this way. Like, this is what I was trying to say, but it didn't come out. And there was all this context that you don't get. And so
and I'm always like, I know. I already knew that.
Yeah.
I got you.
Exactly. But there's something so amazing about that thing where even as I'm doing that, Joey can respond with like, I know. And I find it amazing. I know that his I know is like a very deep, meaningful, like, I know your inside brain. Like, I know your intent. I know where you were coming from. I didn't take it that way, whatever. Like, and it comes from like a history of working together and all that. But like, that's one of those things that has nothing to do with the medium that's communicating it. But it is, to me, as complicated as some of these conversations. It has, and the need for all of that additional context is the nuance and the context that feels lost. And if we're having that sort of conversation around like, hey, can you like do this thing versus like, how do we actually move society forward toward actual climate change? Like, this is going to be messy.
There's two things, one for each of the things that you guys just said. Jess, the pain of it. I saw someone recently online that is like a consultant or something like that talking. I don't follow like strategy Twitter, but occasionally like things pop up in my feed. And someone was talking about like, if it can't be put on a Post-it, it's not worth saying or something like that. And I was like, bleh, bleh. Like, no, absolutely not. Like, I vehemently disagree with that idea of like,
it is the Dale Bernbach brief. I'm just calling it out. It's the Dale Bernbach brief.
Was it you, Aaron?
It was me. It was me in the company chat.
I was God. Like, no.
Yes.
I did not mean to call you out, but I was like, I don't agree with that idea. Like not all things can be distilled down to 3 words, right? But then the flip side to what you said, Aaron, too, is like there are so many people having conversations now that these conduits are getting crossed where someone who is like an expert in one thing, but also has opinions about other things and has a public platform, like all of a sudden their opinion about those things becomes relevant. And something that Tressie said that I was like, yeah, no, that makes sense, which is part of this nuance and thickness of conversation is like, the way she talked about it is like, this person can be like really out of pocket about this one thing and like really in the pocket about a different thing. And like that, those two things can coexist if you're having like a thicker conversation about that person's perspective. And I was like, yes, like I 100% fuck with that idea of like, you don't have to be an expert about everything. And like that you can have sort of like an active, thicker conversation about like, no, I don't agree with you about that thing. Like you're wrong. And that nuance can happen. Anyways, I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the hunger for you're wrong, or the hunger for, not the hunger for you're wrong, but the comfort with tell me more is like just a lost art in actual like individual expertise. Because if you ask for more, then you get more context, you get more nuance, and you actually can prompt people past some of the walls that we put up that we might not even realize are keeping us from fully communicating the idea or contributing to the conversation in a meaningful way. I have to I'm not defending my honor, but to clarify the point about the, because I got to
defend your honor.
The context of the question was, for a creative brief, what do you need to know in general? What are the best tips for briefing a creative team? And the point was, you have to boil the idea down simple enough to be on a Post-it note. Now, I learned that back in the day when I was a DDB, and Bernbach talked about it all the time. But the point of it and the intent of it is that if you're not being single-minded, it's not that you literally put it on Post-it. It's that you need to be single-minded and ruthlessly simple with the idea that you're asking to be amplified. If it is too complex, there is too much room for this team who's going to work for 2 weeks to try to bring it to life in an equally single-minded way. Especially a team that won't, and it is impossible for them to have the same amount of background and nuance. So I call it out because it is an exercise actually in ruining nuance. It is an exercise in being so painfully simple and thinking strategically about the sort of Rube Goldberg machine of ideas that are going to come out of you dropping that one idea out there. And I like it because I'm verbose and I ping pong ideas around all the time. And simplifying to one idea is hard work. It's really hard work. And I know you weren't, but I wanted to. I just want to qualify. That's how it can be used and should be used.
I'm just like addicted to complexity and like super bored by thin conversations, and like people don't want to be my friend because I'm just like disinterested in like how's the weather, like.
The barometric pressure. Jess, I think that you have a thought. I'm reading your face through this nuance technology platform that we have, and I see something.
Two things smacked me in the face just then. One is that like a deep insecurity that this whole butter thing that we were talking about last week was just like very boring to you, and I don't know how I feel about that, but that was deeply probing for me. And then, but bringing it back to nuance is something that is maybe another useful distinction from the post-it note or napkin conversation is that nuance, I don't think necessarily means more words. Like it also could just mean more choiceful or like right, like the everything is used very purposefully, but not necessarily needing more things to get there.
You're right. And it's so funny because like even the idea when pulled through the vector of me is one that gets channeled as more words, which is really
I just
telling.
Need 5 napkins
to like work through the word.
Dude,
but
can I get one more post-it?
Yeah,
can I get
one more?
Can 2 post-its okay?
just maybe 3. Just maybe 3. Different colors say different things. Yeah. No, you're totally right. You're totally right. Doing the work is not necessarily about putting all the words in front of somebody else, but it is taking the beat and sometimes pulling yourself out of the like normal rhythm of normal conversation to collect your thoughts and get to exactly what the right word is. And sometimes it's just hard. And it's, taking the time to do that, though, you're totally right. You can be incredibly, I keep on going back to the idea of congruence. You can be completely in sync with what you are thinking and what you intend to communicate and how this person is intended to receive it with so few words. I think, I don't know, it's not nuance, but it's a story that I have to tell. I'll post it in the show notes, but it was a writer, a very famous writer who had to write a story in 6 words, and
baby shoes never worn.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
Okay, so
for sale, baby shoes never worn.
Sale, baby. Okay, sorry guys.
The Hemingway.
I've got stories that everybody heard 20 years ago. It's cool. I'll be in the corner over here being unnuanced by
100 years ago.
Thanks, Joey. Yes, to clarify, literally 100 years ago, not 20. Oh God!
Was it Hemingway or was it Twain?
No, Hemingway. Oh, all right. Now we got.
It was Hem and Twain, just like emoji.
I felt pretty strongly it was Hemingway, but now it's
Hemingway.
Yeah. Okay.
It's generally attributed to Hemingway, although the link to him is unsubstantiated.
I have heard this.
This is fair. So is this I can't think of a really weird segue. It's the wrap up corner, right? I was trying to come up with one.
Are we at the wrap up corner now? Are we at the wrap up corner?
Yeah, I think so. Is this it? Knock, knock, knock. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like a wrap up.
Cool.
Cool.
For this wrap up
But it's an obtuse angle because it's thick.
Yes. Frills.
I don't understand.
Because the corner could be 90 degrees, but it's like the book is thick, so it's like an obtuse angle, so it's wider. Like
so many pages. That's not good for the binding.
That also is well.
I'm for this wrap up corner, I'm going to read all of the different ways we describe nuance throughout this segment.
I'm excited for this.
Ditto.
A poem by Jess Vander. Nuance as specificity. Nuance as congruence, thought, and expression. Nuance as complexity, as multi-input, as multi-sensory. Nuance as clarity, nuance as context accelerated. Nuance as informal, as a hunger for more. Nuance as choiceful, nuance as purposeful. Nuance as permission to collect your thoughts.
Wow. Yo, do. I can't snap because it'll wake up the dog.
Thanks for all your thoughts.
And if you,
that on a post-it.
If you are a listener of our show, the episode with Tressie McMillan Cottom on Ezra Klein is just, you'll like her more than us. She's better than us.
Yes. So, go over there. Look over there.
Yes. So many podcasts that are better than us. This is just the worst podcast. Why are you just get out of here?
I just meant she, like as a
What's
person.
Even the point?
What is even a podcast? What is a podcast? Bye.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Sylvain!
Recorded in that space between your intent and what your mama just heard you say. That's the nuance.
As always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and poet laureate, Jess Vander.
Thanks, guys.
We'd also like to thank sound engineer and a man full of heart, pride, mind, and muscle, Alex Contal.
We'd like to thank designer Nora Mestrich for all her beautiful everything and for being SMRT. Real smirt.
Amen. Amen. We'd also like to thank the production crew who shows up every day being unabashedly themselves, much to everyone's chagrin. Sarah Gilbert, Les Jacobs, and Tony Vong. Thank all three of you. Y'all are amazing.
And as always, thanks, Alen.
Thank you.
Special thanks to Yarn to Weave. No.
Yes. Yarn to Weave. I'm going to work on Yarn to Weave's voice and her number. I mean, that's what's most important. Like, what's her set list? I'd like to thank Laura Dern because she always deserves more credit everywhere at every point in time. But people forget that she was Ellen's co-star in the puppy episode, which is the coming out episode. She was the character. She's the woman. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. Laura Dern does everything.
Laura Dern does everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know enough about Laura Dern, but I also see like wild Laura Dern love threads online at times. I'm like, clearly this woman has got something going on that is wonderful. I'm just like not close enough. Maybe I need to get closer. Not in a weird way.
No. I think that she is going to be, she has this amazing gravitas that's going to be like, I think that she's appreciated or will get the opportunities to be appreciated like Helen Mirren and Judi Dench and like all these amazing actresses. Glenn Close, because Glenn Close should always be in the list. That just like, they're just amazing at making these characters exist in front of you. And it's just like
timeless bays.
Timeless. Absolutely timeless. I also, okay, you know what? Like, queer dude here. Like, I can't list all the special thanks for everybody who came out before me such that I can speak on a podcast at this company in the role that I have at this company. But, you know, for the sake of my ancestors of all different hues and shades of love, thank all of you. Like, literally could not, like, the fact that this microphone is here and that my voice is being propelled into your ears is an act of resistance that started hundreds of years ago. So to all of y'all, every star that's in the sky, thank you.
That's a beautiful thing.
That was such a beautiful message. And in my head, I started building Aaron's totem of love.
Yes.
But what is funny is that on that, which I don't know is true, but in my mind is true, is that Delilah is on that.
She is. How did you know? Delilah After Dark. She is on there and she is doing her show. Her voice, man, her stories. If you don't know Delilah After Dark, you weren't driving around in the middle of nowhere. Man, she was amazing. Is she still on the air? She might be on the air still, right? Yes. Delilah, you're awesome. You're awesome.
I think Radio Lab or the Daily or someone did an episode about Delilah recently.
I love it.
Well, that's it.
I'd like to thank. No, I got one more. I got one last one.
Go.
Shut it down.
I gotta thank
Aaron. We need to hear it, Aaron.
Thick thanks, Jess. We need thick thanks.
Thanks.
We need
thick
to hear it
right now. I want to thank Mrs. Foltz, who was my 9th grade or 10th grade English teacher, and she's the woman who taught me that my love of language was like great. It wasn't necessarily cool, but she helped me see that like I love words. I'm good at words. And that's like laudable. She was hard. She was a difficult, hard teacher. She taught me like the 5-point essay, like all that sort of stuff that you get a 3-point essay at that point, 5-paragraph essay. But man, her vocab quizzes, I would walk in there, wouldn't study. She would look at me and said, "You didn't study. You still aced it." Okay. She called me out. And so thank you, Ms. Foltz, for for calling me in.
If you can't be thick with your conversations, be thick with your thanks.
That's it, man. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I wanted that about it. Yep. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Oh no.
So creepy.
I don't know when my card stopped reading, but it got full at some point.
An hour and 5 minutes.
Yeah. Oops. I blew it.